Hey folks, welcome back to Failure at Retirement. Haven't been doing a lot of videos still because it's hot. It's hot here where Failure lives. Today I believe is supposed to be about 105. It's about 11:30 in the morning, and pretty sure it's already well up in the 90s, 95 probably at least. Failure don't really relate to the heat. Love the weather in California, but we got a month or two here that we can get some days that I don't appreciate. Anyway, so what do we want to talk about today? So today's Slice of Life, Failure is going to talk about retirement and how did a guy, even though he's no good at retirement, how did a guy get retired when you don't really have much snow on the roof, if you catch my meaning. So I'm not a financial advisor. I've just been lucky, okay? And this particular episode is not going to be really about finances at all. So what I'm planning to do here is over the maybe once a month or something, maybe a little more often, I'm just going to talk about retirement and how I got here. Whether I'm good at it or I fail at it, it's really kind of just beside the point. Like, I'm here, right? I kind of made it. So today's version is going to be about really and this is mostly hindsight, of course, but how did a guy get here? And how did a guy get here before a lot of other folks, right? Because one of the issues, frankly, that I kind of do have now is my friends are all still working. They all still got jobs. They're more responsible than me. And so I don't got a guy that we can go, hey, let's just make a road trip today. Mrs. Failure, of course, is always happy to assist in these matters, but sometimes it's good if a guy just, goes out to lunch with his buddies or whatever, you know what I mean? So how did I get here before those guys? Well, looking back on it, there's kind of three key things that I could see that what I'm going to say is it allowed me to leapfrog a lot of folks. Okay, and what I mean by that is, we got lucky a couple times, but really there's these three things that I did from early on. And I'm not saying other folks didn't do this too, but it just really, I think, for me personally, just propelled me forward each and every time. And I especially want, if I got any young people on here watching this, pay attention. Again, I'm not an expert. That's my friend Greg. He's the expert. But seriously, so the first thing I think, looking back on it, is I just worked. I worked and worked and worked, and I was never home. Thank God Mrs. Failure raised the kids, got two excellent boys out of the deal. I quite frankly didn't have a lot to do with it because I was working. Starting out of college, I went to work for my folks, farming. Quite honestly, they kind of took advantage of me. I didn't know any different. We just worked, even in the winter when it was slow, we worked 60 hours a week. And then in the summer, really think nothing of working 60, maybe 70 even. And then harvest, oh my God, we were talking 80 hours a week plus. Of course that was 7 days a week, but man, oh man. And then even on top of that, even in those days, I frequently had a side hustle, believe it or not. I mean, part of it is because I was starving to death, but, you know, we didn't have any money. We had nothing, and nothing was ever given to us, nothing. But even when I worked for my folks, and I worked tremendous hours, you know, most of my friends were working 40 hours a week. And I was just working. And on top of that, I had a side hustle. I almost always had a side hustle or multiple side hustles. Later on, after the folks starved me out and I just had to seek other opportunities, like, I always had multiple side hustles. Like, I would work my day job. Most of those jobs were anywhere from 40 to 60 hours a week, depending on the time of the year. And I would literally stop somewhere else, you know, work from 7 to 3:30 or whatever, and get in my truck, and somewhere between work and home, I would stop at some friend's ranch and work another, you know, 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever it took, depending on the time of year. And I'm not saying I worked harder than other folks. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of my friends worked hard too, but in hindsight, like, I didn't have time to do nothing else. I didn't have time to be out partying. I didn't have time to have toys. I didn't have a boat. I didn't have an RV. You know, I didn't have time for any of that stuff, like, because I was working. And even at that, like, we didn't have money, really, but this kind of brings me to my next point. So we were always very intentional with our money. Very intentional. Like I said, for the most part, you know, we didn't have a boat when we were younger. We didn't have an RV, and most of our friends had that stuff already, but we didn't. And, you know, we didn't have any other stuff. We didn't have Jeeps. We didn't have snowmobiles. We didn't have quads, none of that stuff. Like, that stuff depreciates like crazy. We didn't buy a lot of cars. We mostly bought new or very late model cars. That was one thing we did. But we've always run our rigs 10 or 12 years. Like, that's our average. Like, we buy them new or very late model, and we just run them until they just won't hardly go no more. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I don't know, you know, and that's not really part of the point here, okay? And then a friend of mine, my friend Mark, he turned me on to Dave Ramsey. I believe it was in 2014, maybe 2013, along in there. By that time, I was fully self-employed. We were farming a lot, actually, at that point in time. And went to visit my buddy Mark, and he asked me if I had ever heard of Dave Ramsey. And so when I got home, started listening to Dave while I was driving tractor, working in the shop, whatever. I'm telling you guys, if you don't know who Dave Ramsey is, like, you ought to investigate that. It's worth your time. Dave's a good guy. His principles are pretty sound. We weren't able to 100% follow him all the way, but by golly, we came pretty close. And I can tell you, it's a game changer. You know, at the time when we found Dave Ramsey, we were close to $1 million in debt. And, you know, a lot of that was the farming, right? We owned a ranch. We owned 100 acres, farming 2-3 leased properties. And mostly because the ranch we owned, but we were close to $1 million in debt. And, you know, don't get me wrong, like, our net worth by that time was pretty decent. I'm going to say, you know, a couple $1 million. So it's not like we were, like, horribly underwater. We weren't struggling, to make our payments the way a lot of people that call. If you listen to Dave, a lot of people call in, and, you know, one of my favorites is they retired at, you know, 55 or something, and they're 58, and they don't think they're physically capable of working anymore, but they can't pay their bills. Like, they don't have enough money to put food on the table. And I got to ask myself, like, how'd you get yourself there? Like, what were you thinking? Why did you quit your job and quote unquote retire, like, when you didn't have no money? Like, I don't know. I don't understand that. We were very intentional. We found Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey helped me see the light, that basically what I figured out at that time, after listening to Dave for a few months and taking his class, I was on a hamster wheel. Like, that's all it was. I was just on a hamster wheel. Like, you know, you're farming and you have a pretty good year, you got a tax problem, and, you know, well, okay, well, we need to buy something, right? We need to buy something we can depreciate. Oh, no, no, no. Don't get on that hamster wheel. Like, you know, next thing you know, you're borrowing a little more money from the bank. Well, then, you know, you gotta farm a little more. You gotta make more money to make that payment, and you got a bigger tax problem then. And then, you know, now you got maybe more equipment. In my case, mostly lease at that time, but, like, you know, you go out and you rent more ground. Well, now you got to have more equipment, and now you got to make more money, and now you got a bigger tax problem. That's the hamster wheel. That's what I call it. Like, the banks, the tax man, he gets you on the hamster wheel. He don't let go. You run fast, as fast as you can go until you trip and fall. That's where you're at. Dave Ramsey made me realize that. He made me realize I was on the hamster wheel. And Dave ain't a farmer. He don't know nothing about farming. But this is what I was able to figure out through listening to him. And his main message is to be very intentional with your money. We were already intentional with our money. Even though we had a lot of debt, we still had a high net worth, and we weren't having problems making the payments. I was just over the hamster wheel situation. So that's number 2. Be intentional with your money, okay? And then number 3. When I was in my late 30s, I'm going to say 38, I had moved away from working blue-collar jobs. I had got me a white-collar job in sales when I was 35. Before that, always blue-collar jobs. Loved it. I love working with my hands. I love building things. I love the trades. Great people, good, honest work, right? I love that. But I decided I had to work with my head. Like, long-term, working with your body is just, that deal don't work for your whole life. So I got a white-collar job, had it for a couple years. I'm like 38. I'm kind of reevaluating, like, what can I do to do better? Like, I'm doing okay. This is before I was self-employed. I'm working a sales job. It's full commission. When I had that sales job, I didn't do too many side hustles, okay? I already talked about the side hustle situation. Didn't do a lot of side hustle while I had the sales job because it was a full commission sales job. And so I figured out early on, like, the more I work, the more commission I make. And that's what Old Failure's looking for. Old Failure, always money motivated. And so, you know, the more you work, the more commission you make. So forget the side hustles. Work that job Monday through Friday. Worked it minimum of 12 hours a day. Show up at the office usually 6:15, 6:30 in the morning. Right in there somewhere. And then usually, you know, go out and make sales calls most of the day, come back to the office, catch up on doing some quotes or research or whatever your customer needs, right? usually, honestly, 6:30, 7 o'clock, sometimes 8 o'clock before old failure locked that office and went home. Everybody else went home at 5, not failure. Anyway, I kind of got back to the work hard part. So, number 3, when failure's evaluating his life at 38 years old, he's thinking about college. Did that college degree, did he really make that pay? Did it not pay? I'm glad I went to college. I think at this point, I think it's paid for itself. But at that point, it's like, man, you know, I don't know. So I'm reviewing college and it hits me. The most important takeaway I got from college, number 3, set goals, okay? Have a goal. Have a short-term goal, 6 months, this year, whatever the case may be, short-term goal. Have a midterm goal, 2 to 3 years. I want to be here. I want to be doing this. Have a long-term goal, a 5 to 10-year goal. You know, in 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, however long it takes, this is what I want to be doing. Set those goals, keep them in mind, be very intentional about those goals and how you're going to accomplish them. Mostly just the fact that you set the goal and think about it every day, it most likely will happen because it's on your mind all the time. And what I realized is I had not every teacher in college, obviously, but I'll bet 25% of them at some point just kind of stopped the curriculum for, you know, maybe the entire class for the day, maybe for half of the class or whatever, and talked about setting goals. And this is something I didn't string it all together until I was, you know, 15 years out of college. But it was shocking once I realized that how many of those professors had actually mentioned setting goals at some point during the class. Like, that's crazy, right? And it didn't hit me how many until I was 38, like 15 years out of college. So I set goals. So you ask yourself, you know, failure, like, what goals did you set? Well, so I ponder that for a little bit. My 39th birthday was just almost there. So on my 39th birthday, I set my first goal. I decided I wanted to be a millionaire in 5 years. And this was, when was this? 2004, roughly, I guess. So the economy's booming, right? Don't get me wrong, failure don't have much, but his house and vehicles and a few other things, 401k, stuff like that. And old failure, like, he don't tell his wife about his goal for like a year because he doesn't know how Mrs. Failure's going to take this goal, right? But let me tell you, like, I'm cracking down on the whole family. Like, you know, we gotta cut back. Like, and then I finally tell him, I got this goal. Mrs. Failure's like, you're freaking nuts. And I'm like, listen, it's not as much of a stretch as you think. We live in California. Our house is worth better than half of that, right? And so she finally agreed that it wasn't that much of a stretch. And but then, like, so I wanted to be a millionaire at the time I was 44, right? And then I just, you know, I kind of had a couple more goals and just some shorter term stuff, clear up a little debt, stuff like that to help the main goal happen, right? And it just happened. And, you know, it didn't happen when I was 44 because when I was I started farming when I was 43. And so that was a sort of a temporary setback. You know, I had to invest some money to get started farming. that I wasn't going to get back immediately, right? And then also by the time I was 42, 43, I was realizing I was being a little too hard on the family, like a little too hard on Mrs. Failure and the kids, a little too focused in. Realized it was gonna happen, but I didn't need to drag them kicking and screaming with me. This is something I kind of more need to do maybe on my own. And so that was a goal. And you know, I didn't, because I started farming and I was kind of growing the farming pretty rapidly, didn't really hit that goal till I was probably 46, honestly. But you know, I mean, and I'm talking, you know, net, right? Maybe a little earlier, maybe 45, I don't know exactly, but it wasn't 44, I can assure you that. But that's okay. You know, it's okay to hit the pause button for a minute because you still got that goal in mind. You're still thinking about it literally almost every day. And, you know, I got one more thing I'm just going to kind of add in here, right? And this was part of my process, also a very intentional or important step, right? So here's number 4. So what I realized, I got this commission sales job. It's like 2006, and I can see the cliff coming. Like, you know, the economy, it can't keep going at this rate, right? And, you know, I'm one of the top guys in the state, in the company, definitely the top guy at that time, like in our region, in the division. You know, I'm probably one of the top 10 guys in the Western United States for the company I was working for, as far as sales, annual sales or whatever. So, but I'm thinking, this is gonna get rough. Like, when this economy blows up, am I gonna be able to sell anything? Like, this could get rough. What if the company don't make it? Like, I literally, at that point in 2006, realized I had 100% of my eggs in the company basket. If the company failed, even if the company didn't go broke, but they failure, like, I could, you know, if I lose that job, things could get ugly in a hurry. And so I thought about that. I mean, I'm an outside salesman. I'm driving around all the time with nothing but time to think, right? So what I come up with is a guy needs multiple income streams. Like, anybody who doesn't have multiple income streams is a fool, honestly. And I'm sorry if that fits you. I don't mean to hurt your feelings. Reevaluate, though. And really, this kind of also fits into Old Failure always having side hustles. Like, always. And believe me, I lost my job multiple times, got fired, I quit, whatever the case. I'm borderline unemployable. We all know that. But I always, because I had frequently multiple side hustles, I had multiple income streams without even really realizing how important that was. But when I was in that sales job, I didn't have too many side hustles. And it just really got to just bearing down on it and evaluating. Guys should always look in the mirror. Whenever possible, look in the mirror. If the world ain't working for you, is it the world or is it you? In my case, it was always me. Like, the world's not going to change. Guys got to adapt to it. So get multiple income streams. And that is part of the way Old Failure started farming. I realized he could still work that job, talk to my friends that were farmers. If I could just get the ground, I could just manage it and be the financial guy. And it's just my money at risk. A lot of my friends early on, they were doing all the tractor work for me. They were helping me with it, you know, because I'm working my job. But they're all like, Bruce, we got plenty of tractors. We got guys to drive them. Like, you don't have to do this part. You be the manager. And so initially, when I started and I was still working the sales job, starting to farm, I was a manager. I was a financial guy. I was out there working myself on the weekends and the evenings and stuff. But a guy's kind of a control freak if he's looking in the mirror and being honest with himself. Kind of a control freak. And so over time, the guy was just, you know, spending more and more time working at the ranch, doing more and more stuff himself, relying on the friends less and less, but still working that sales job for 2 years. But toward the end of the 2 years, failure was just physically and mentally exhausted. Working 40 hours a week, maybe a little more, sometimes 45 over at the sales job, because by that time, you know, by now we're talking 2009 or so, leased my first ranch in 2008. And by 2009 or so, like a lot of the companies I sold to just straight up closed. You know, the factories I went into to sell product, closed the factory for 6 months, lay everybody off. Well, there's one sales call you ain't making this week. There's no commission coming from there. I had customers I was selling, you know, several $100,000 a year in product to in like 2000, let's say 2006, even 2007. And then all of a sudden in like 2008 and 9, like I'm selling them like $20,000 worth of stuff. Like, that dog don't hunt when a guy's full commission and you got multiple customers going through the same thing. Not their fault, it was just the economy, you know. But fortunately, I figured out the multiple income stream thing. And so here I am farming. And basically by like late 2009, 2010, that company I was working for, they were darn near broke. Like, you know, big international corporation, and like everything I could see from where I was, they were almost broke. And it was really coming down to a matter of time, you know, thank God, multiple income streams. Or are they going to go broke first, or am I going to quit first, or how's this going to go down? Well, one day I got a phone call and it went down. They just called me up out of the clear blue sky, told me to come into the office the next day for a meeting. Very importantly said, sorry, I had to get a wasp off my leg, a little frightening. Anyway, they called me up, laid me off. And best thing that ever happened to me, honestly. By that time, I'd been farming 2 years. I had no idea how much the job was holding me back. So if a guy is gonna start his own business, I got plenty of thoughts on that too, but I'm gonna save that for another episode because this one's getting way longer than I figured. One of the things failure's best at, running his mouth. Anyway, I'm gonna save some of that for the next episode. So thank you guys for watching. If you haven't subscribed already and you don't want to miss more of how Will Failure retired at 50, subscribe so you don't miss out. Hit the like button. If you have any questions whatsoever, absolutely drop a comment. Do not hesitate to drop a comment. All right? Appreciate you watching. Appreciate everything about YouTube and all the people who do watch me. I think it's awesome. I never had any idea anybody would care anything about what I do. And here we are. So you folks, thank you and have a good day.